It is 2:00, and I just want to say, begin by thanking each of you for taking the time out of your afternoon to attend our open house. Your presence here really demonstrates how much you care about our community and our future. I also just want to take a moment to recognize that the City of Morden is located on Treaty Number 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, and Dakota nations, as well as the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We honor their contributions to the past, present, and future, and we express our gratitude for the land, water that sustain us, and we commit to learning from and working in partnership with the original caretakers of this territory. Today is about more than just pipes, pumps, lagoons, and treatment technology. Today is about ensuring that Morden remains a community where families can build homes, businesses can invest, jobs can be created, and future generations can continue to call Morden home. Many of you built this community. Some of you are watching your children and grandchildren decide whether they can build their lives here too. That is what this project is really all about. Our goal here is simple: to tell you the story of how we got where we are today, why this project is necessary, what Council has done over the past several years, and where we are headed to next. Every city relies on infrastructure that is overlooked by many. Roads, water, sewers, wastewater treatment. These are the invisible systems that allow a community to function every single day. For decades, Morden's wastewater lagoon has served us well, but over the past several years, it's become clear that our existing system was approaching its limits. That reality now limits our ability to grow, and it makes meeting today's environmental standards harder every year. One of the responsibilities of Council is making decisions that won't just benefit today's residents, but also those who will live here 20 or 30 years from now. Wastewater capacity is the foundation upon which every growing community is built. Without wastewater capacity, homes can't be built, businesses cannot expand, industry cannot invest, and communities cannot continue to grow. In 2023, after extensive engineering work, the city announced that a lagoon-based moving bed biofilm reactor system was the recommended treatment solution. As engineering progressed, estimated cost increased significantly, and rather than being rushed, Council paused, challenged assumptions, and explored every possible alternative. We investigated rebuilding on site, constructing elsewhere. We looked at different treatment technologies, temporary solutions, regional partnerships, government funding opportunities, and financing options. Nothing was taken off the table because we owe it to taxpayers to ensure every dollar is spent responsibly. Throughout this process, we have been working with the RMS Stanley and the City of Winkler because while we are separate municipalities, we share one regional economy. Most recently, that cooperation produced a signed framework of understanding with the RMS Stanley, a first step towards a possible interim solution, which you'll hear more about shortly. Government funding has been essential. We have already secured meaningful support from federal and provincial partners, more than $43 million confirmed to date, but there remains a significant funding gap. Council continues advocating to the province and federal government because Infrastructure of this magnitude requires partnerships. We're not asking governments to carry this load alone, but we can't carry that alone either. Delaying this project increases construction costs, regulatory risk, and limits the future housing and economic growth. Today, we have a clear path forward. We know what needs to be built. We have completed years of engineering work, and I want to sincerely thank Stantec and Manitoba Water Services for the many hours behind it. As we continue to secure the remaining funding needed, Council is committed to transparency, responsible financial management, and ensuring residents understand both the challenges and the opportunities before us. This project is about protecting our environments, supporting housing, creating jobs, attracting investment, and ensuring Morden continues to grow responsibly for generations to come. And I want to thank you for your patience, your trust, and your willingness to be part of this important conversation. Together, we will build the infrastructure our community needs, not just for today, but for generations to come. I'd just like to introduce our project team. We have Saibal Basu from Stantec Consulting, who has been our project lead for many years. Beside him is Gordon Damon with Red River Group, and next to him is Santok Randawa with Manitoba Water Services, and our city engineer, Nick Zak. Zolk, yeah, I'll get that right. They will present the project and share where things stand regarding our funding, our timelines, the path forward, and then when that is done, we'll open the floor to you for your questions. And if you'll note on your tables, you have some white cards. You can put your questions on there and hand them in, or you can, if you have any concerns or ideas you want to share and leave them with us, put your contact information and we'll use that to get back to you. So that is my comments for now, and with that, let's get started.
Thank you, Mayor Penner, and good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you all coming. As Mayor Penner mentioned, my name is Saibal Basu. I'm with Stantec Consulting. I'd like to acknowledge one of my colleagues with me, Brett Ransom. Brett, if you don't mind standing up for a second. He and I are closely working on this project for many years, and I want to make sure that he's acknowledged. I'm going to talk to you about the wastewater project today, and go through all the steps and options and wonderful stuff that we have worked on so far, and hopefully a final solution is there for us to move this project forward and finally get implemented in the near future. Quick outline of the agenda. Obviously, Mayor Penner has already given some opening remarks. I'll walk you through the project background, talk about why this project is needed, the rationale, discuss the design criteria, the basis of design, what kind of size, like in terms of service population, flows, etc. Talk about the wastewater treatment options that we have looked at over the years, and also present you with the process that we took to pre-select an equipment system that we think is probably the best solution to make this project viable. And last but not the least, provide you with some cost. This is again very preliminary cost. We are at the very onset of the project phase, but at least we have an order of magnitude cost that has been developed. And most importantly, present to you the path forward, the schedule, the next steps, etc. So in terms of the project background, The City of Morden uses what is known as the facultative lagoon system for wastewater treatment. It's located at the junction of the road 27 West and 14 North. If you know what that exactly is, it's behind the Best Western Hotel. You probably have smelled it more than when you have looked at it, but yes, it does provide some challenges with odor, like most facultative lagoons. Obviously, when it was located there, none of those commercial properties existed, but that is certainly one of the things we had to look at when we looked at locations, alternate locations. The system consists of 6 cells in total. 1 is a primary cell, and 5 is a secondary cell. And I'll explain briefly for the interest of those who might be wondering what a facultative lagoon is. There's only 1 cell, that is the cell number 5, that was constructed in about 2007, that is lined. And I'll also explain why I use the word lined, because if you're doing sewage treatment in a lagoon, the lagoon material that you use to construct the cells should be almost impermeable. But unfortunately, that kind of soil do not exist in around Morden. And one of the challenges that we have with the existing lagoon infrastructure is that it was constructed with soil that is very permeable. And because of that, when the infrastructure was constructed, probably about 35 years ago, they put in a tile drain system to collect any of the seepage, and it is pumped like an effluent into the receiving stream, which is the Dead Horse Creek. The wastewater is stored there for 227 days, and it starts from 1st of November till June 15th, after which the treated effluent is released by gravity into Dead Horse Creek. One of the things that got implemented in around 2015, 2016, when the province mandated to reduce the phosphorus. As you know, phosphorus has caused a lot of challenges in Lake Winnipeg, and is basically creating algal blooms. It's a nutrient. So they implemented that all lagoons in Manitoba, pretty much every lagoons in Manitoba would have to reduce the phosphorus to less than 1 milligrams per liter. And for that, a chemical like alum is used to precipitate the phosphorus. So that brings us to the question as to this facultative lagoon. What is a facultative lagoon? Because there are so many options. A facultative lagoon historically has been probably the system of choice for the prairies, particularly in Manitoba. Most of the small communities and medium-sized communities have relied on this very simple treatment system. It consists of essentially 2 different cells. One is called a primary cell, which is the first part of the system where the raw sewage comes in, and then the second is the secondary cells. And depending on the size and capacity, you can have multiple number of these cells to treat the sewage. The facultative word relates to neither aerobic or anaerobic. And I'm talking a little bit of the language we use in wastewater, so I don't necessarily assume that you understand it. Aerobic means in presence of free oxygen. Anaerobic means in absence of oxygen. What it does, it mimics Mother Nature. When we discharge, let's say, theoretically, sewage into the natural water body, there exists multitude of bacteria that thrive under different environments. So this is more of a natural type of system that happens in the natural environment, that is somewhat engineered, and all we do is we have no control of that environment. It is, like I said, mimicking what happens in the natural environment. So the facultative is a type of or environment which is neither anaerobic, which is the extreme, no oxygen, or totally aerobic, where there's lots of oxygen. It lies in between that. However, there lies a layer of aerobic zone on the top because the algae tends to proliferate. Algae is fantastic because it can take in, through photosynthesis, and release oxygen. And that oxygen is used by the bugs or the bacteria that break down the organic matter present in the sewage. The solids would then settle in the bottom, solids in the sewage, in the primary cell, which is the very first cell where the wastewater enters. And that settles in the bottom where there is no oxygen, which is the anaerobic zone. And over a period of time, the solids break down. So we have to give that a lot of time. There's no mechanical system. There's no artificial air being introduced. Everything happens through natural process. If there's any oxygen diffusion because of the wind action, it all happens naturally. So that's why you see that 227 days is mandated for multiple reasons. One being, we need the time, unlike a mechanical plant, where we need to hold it for several hours, we need several months. That's the difference. And because of that, depending on the size of the community, the footprint is huge. So for a city like Morden or even Winkler, the lagoon infrastructure takes up a lot of space. So when the system was designed, it really was geared towards small communities and slowly moved into medium and large communities for one particular reason. Unfortunately, you have to have a water body that does not freeze year-round. So in the winter, Dead Horse Creek freezes. So there's no way you can continuously discharge the treated effluent. Even if you had the opportunity to have a treated effluent, you cannot discharge it. So you have to hold that. And because of that, the province, through the Manitoba Environment and Climate Change, the regulatory body, limits discharge in certain time of the year, which is after June 15th and before 1st of November, which is why all lagoons, facultative lagoons, any treated water that cannot go into a body that freezes has to be held back for that period of time. So hopefully this gives you a bit of a perspective of some of the challenges faced here in Morden. Add to that, the province have implemented what is called a Tier 1 environmental standards. So for communities larger than 10,000 people, you now need to treat to a higher standard. And for that, this facultative lagoon is not suited. It is a limit of technology, as we call it in our field. It cannot go to that level of treatment. You almost need advanced treatment to remove the challenging thing present in wastewater, which is nitrogen. And so why is this upgrade required? The first, obviously, is given when the lagoon was constructed to where we are now, there is no capacity left. And we'll talk about some of the mitigating measures being discussed to provide to buy some time while we implement a permanent solution. Secondly, because of this Tier 1 requirements, where we have to meet a total nitrogen, it is one of the most challenging things to do with a natural system. It can be done fairly easily with a mechanical plant. But with a lagoon-type infrastructure, it is quite a bit of a challenge, especially it cannot be done with the facultative lagoon technology. So for that, we need to upgrade. The other thing, as I mentioned, is that the current lagoon has been constructed with materials that are very permeable. That being somewhat grandfathered by the province, the word meaning is that you don't touch it, you don't do anything with it, but the moment you start making any changes, you are then brought back into the current standards. And therefore, you would then be required to spend a lot of money trying to fix the problem because of the fact that it doesn't have the material it needs to prevent any leakage. The other, obviously, reason is that the Morden is growing. When this lagoon was designed, it was designed, I think, up to 9,000 people. You guys are right now, say around 10,000-ish. So, and with projected growth in the future, which I'll show you, the plan is to double the population. So obviously, the current infrastructure is inadequate. And last but not the least, As sewage comes in and treated, a lot of the solids break down, but inherently, over a period of time, you start to build a lot of solids. This lagoon has never been desludged. All the sludge over the years have accumulated, and there was an extensive study done to estimate the amount of sludge, and so that is kind of occupying some of the capacity. So that sludge has to be taken care of. So these are all sort of factors, and I give you a bit of a background on what the facultative lagoon is, and hopefully you can appreciate them when I move forward and discuss some of the newer technology that we plan to implement, what that does in terms of sewage treatment. Feel free to ask questions when we get into the Q&A session. So for the design, we are looking at 2048, and we are looking at roughly a population just under 21,000, around 21,000, which equates to flows of average flow of 7.85 million liters per day, a maximum month flow. A maximum month flow is typically what we call the maximum flow that occurs in a 30-day segment. So that's the maximum flow, and that's typically what we use for designing the biological part of the wastewater treatment system. It's about 13 million liters per day. I'm kind of rounding some of the numbers. And then there's also a peak wet weather flow, which is the instantaneous flow that comes in. And typically we use those flows to size lift stations because, as you can appreciate, last few weeks, how much rainfall has been occurring. It overwhelms the collection system, but everything flows into the lift station, and you have to have the pumping system to convey it further to the treatment system. So we have to be aware of what those peak flows are, and as you can see, those are almost like 4 or 5 times the average flows. So I talked about the tier 1 standards that that Morden would have to be, that Morden falls under, and currently the effluent qualities goes back to the late 80s, early 90s, which was like 30 milligrams of BOD. BOD stands for biochemical oxygen demand. It is an indication of the residual organic content of the wastewater. Higher the number, the bad it is. So meaning that if you want better treatment, that number should be low. So that typically in today's day and age is about 25 milligrams per liter. And there is also ammonia in the wastewater that comes from the sewage. Urine is one of the primary source of nitrogen, and ammonia is that component of the nitrogen that is very toxic to the aquatic species. So if you don't remove the ammonia, and when you discharge the effluent to the receiving streams, lakes, rivers, creeks, it causes a lot of impact on that receiving stream. So obviously the treatment process has to have that capability to reduce the value of that ammonia through the biological process to reduce the toxicity of the effluent. And that brings us to that total nitrogen that I mentioned is a number that is very much limits the existing technology to be used in the future because you have to meet that. And E. coli, it's a bacteriological indicator, meaning that it's a disease causing. So basically you have to reduce the impact on the receiving stream because sewage obviously has got a lot of pathogens and bacteria that you don't want to go into your receiving stream, and that number is usually 200. So with that in mind, and I personally have been working on this project since 2020, so right around the COVID era. So it's been about 6 years now, and we have looked at so many different options. The first thing we looked at is that how can we buy some time to look at the expanding the lagoon. For those of you who are aware of where this lagoon is situated, is somewhat landlocked. There's agricultural fields around. And again, the quality of soil there is not very amenable for the construction of a lagoon. So what we do under this kind of situation, we provide a sort of a synthetic liner. The liner does what a natural clay barrier would do. So a lot of communities who have sewage lagoons, if they have good clay, usually it's about 1 meter thick that we need to maintain. And that is measured, the permeability is like 1 times 10 to the power of -7 centimeters per second. That's how slow water has to move, and we measure it in the lab. The geotechnical folks, the soil scientists, they would do a test to measure how slow that permeability is. The slower, the better, meaning it's a very tight liner. And when we don't get it, we then put an artificial liner, which sounds very simple, but is very expensive. And it becomes more expensive if your infrastructure is so large. For a small system, it may not be a big deal, but for Morden, it's millions and millions of dollars to line the existing. So we did look into that option. But obviously, as I mentioned, that doesn't provide us the long-term solution because it's a technology limit. The system cannot meet the nitrogen limits. So we looked at, okay, keep it simple, but do something to meet that nitrogen. So we looked at what is called an engineered or constructed wetland. Obviously, there's no space at the existing site, so we looked at alternate site, and we presented that to the council a few years back, I think in 2023, previous council, I believe, and it was perhaps one of the best choice, but it didn't move forward because the land purchase became a challenge. Then we looked at looking at a different option, which is a subsurface wetland at the existing site. It's a patented process. A company out of Alberta called Magna came in with a solution, but it wasn't viable. We then looked at the Manitoba solution, which is the submerged attached growth reactor. It's by a company called Nexum out of Winnipeg, just outside Winnipeg. It consists of partial mix lagoons followed by this submerged attached growth reactor, and I'm going to explain that in a little bit more detail very shortly. We looked at the existing site and multiple sites, and that was one of the more viable and practical option that would pretty much ticked all the boxes. But then we went back to a mechanical plant, especially because there was some challenges in securing land, let's say that. So we went back to the existing site because we could do a mechanical plant which required a very small, compact footprint. I think Mayor Penner referred that the moving bed biofilm reactor, or MBBR for short, it's a well-established mechanical biological process, but that it ended up with the same challenges because even though it produced the effluent right out of the back, in the middle of the winter, you couldn't go to Deros Creek. So ultimately, you have to store it. And you have to store it for a period of time, maybe not 227 days, but still several months in the winter, which would require the existing lagoon infrastructure, because you're not going to build another storage cell. And the water would be much cleaner, but you still have to store it. So overall, the cost was quite high. We then looked at a regional solution by having an integrated system being built with City of Winkler. We were already involved in the design and construction of the facility in Winkler, which is pretty much finished and will be started up. It's already working. So we looked at that. That option also didn't go through. We then came back because the city was able to secure some land across from the existing lagoon site. And so there was an option for looking at the Sagar, which is a very interesting solution, as well as another technology called Lemna, which is a company out of Minnesota that has got a lot of smaller lagoons, not as big as this, and they use a series of covered lagoons for treatment. So what I'm trying to say here is that for the last 6 years, we have been on a journey pretty much turning every pages of the wastewater technology booklet to figure out what would work and where it can work. So as I mentioned, in 2025, the city was able to secure land across from the existing lagoon site. And the idea was to build a facility, a modern facility, that would allow them to discharge continuously as practical to the Dead Horse Creek as long as possible, with no limitation, so long there is no freezing at the receiving end, and provide the treatment that meets all the requirements laid down by the province. And when there is winter, and when winter sets in, we could look at storing. It's kind of similar to the option that I explained for the mechanical plant. We would use the existing infrastructure only as an effluent storage pond. No treatment, because it would be already treated. It's because we couldn't go to Dead Horse Creek because it's frozen. We would then be able to store it temporarily through the peak of the winter months and then release it back into Dead Horse Creek. So we developed both a feasibility and a preliminary design, and we used both the technologies. The Lemna technologies, it's somewhat similar. It's a kind of a combination of a lagoon and some mechanical components. The Sagar process is pretty much more of a lagoon-based technology. And in order to make a decision as to which way to move forward, we went ahead and we solicited bids through a competitive process from both the vendors. And both the Lemna and Nexum provided bids, which closed last week. And the team consisting of City of Morden, Manitoba Water Services Board, and Stantec did an evaluation. And I apologize, that table is probably not visible, but these are the criteria that we used. It's a combination of technical factors and financial factors that we use to evaluate. And based on the evaluation and a unanimous decision, we have recommended the Nexum Sagar system. It has been selected, but the contract has not been awarded. And this will be located, as I mentioned, hopefully you guys can see that. If I use the pointer, sorry. I don't think the pointer is working, but that box, the shaded box, is where the new system would be located. And the left arrow shows after treatment during the heat of the winter, we'll store it temporarily, but for most of the year, we'll be going continuous. That's the arrow pointing up to Dead Horse Creek. There will be a large 600 followed by a 750 sewer that would bring the bulk of the sewage to this site, which would be via the upgraded collection system. There is also a small lift station called the Highway Yards Lift Station, which currently goes to the lagoon, which then will be directed into this new system. And the new system, which is the Nexum's Sagar, consists of 3 partially mixed anoxic lagoons. Chairman, how's the time? Am I okay? Continue? Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. It consists of 3 anoxic lagoons, so they are partially mixed. They are not aerated vigorously. And from there, it goes to the Sagar system, and I'll show you what that Sagar system is. The project will consist of 2 new lift stations, and there will be a UV for seasonal disinfection, and it would be only for the part that we store during the winter. And because of the geese and ducks activities, we have seen the E. coli levels can go up, so we want to disinfect that part of the effluent before it is discharged. It's a fairly simple operation. It's not really any mechanically intensive type system. Got a very significant track record, especially in cold climates. That's one of the key things that we had to evaluate. Like, show us where you have done it. And one big example is, well, Winkler is the same system. Winkler is a larger system, but is pretty much the same type of technology that's being used. The flow path is slightly different, but pretty much the same concept, and it has worked very well. The company is Winnipeg-based, so it's fairly close. So in terms of long-term support, they will be available. And what is very important when we do this treatment system is to not only keep it simple, but it has to work. But you need to have the ability, the operations need to have the ability to share the knowledge. So this provides an opportunity for the operations in Morden, who hasn't operated a system like this for a long period of time, to share, to have a conversation with the next door, Winkler, and share the lessons learned, what to do and what not to do, those kind of stuff. So it will be very beneficial. So as I mentioned, it consists of 3 lagoon cells that are pre-anoxic, partially mixed, and then it goes into the Sagar beds for nitrification. So the nitrification conversion of ammonia to nitrates happen in the Sagar, and then the nitrates is recycled back into the lagoons where the anoxic conditions allow the bacteria to break down that nitrate into nitrogen gas. The nitrogen gas escapes into the atmosphere, and this allows the process to achieve the total nitrogen. Chemically, we have to add alum, which is shown here, and it is added to the recycled stream to precipitate the phosphorus, like currently they use alum. And the treated effluent will be discharged directly to Dead Horse Creek via the existing pipes. It is a gravity pipe right now. We plan to reuse it as a force main because we are going to pump it. Because we are going to pump it at a higher rate, we want to use it as a force main versus a gravity. And then when the freezing conditions occur, the existing lagoons will be used as an effluent storage pond for roughly 6 months. That's how we have assumed at the design flow condition, which is 2048. So it will provide a lot more capacity at the beginning few years when the flows are lower than our projected flows. So what is a Sagar system? So Sagar is an acronym. Unfortunately, in wastewater, we like to use a lot of acronyms. Sagar stands for Submerged Attached Growth Reactor. The word attach is important because the bugs that convert the toxic ammonia to nitrates like to attach themselves. So it's actually a clean gravel bed pretty much built into the ground, which is lined, the dugout, imagine, is lined and filled with gravel. And at the bottom, there is a series of aeration piping and also collection piping. So the water percolates from the top, it's distributed across the top, water percolates, air comes up from the bottom, allows the bugs to grow within that bed, which allows the treatment to happen, meaning the ammonia, which is one of the challenging part of any wastewater treatment, to be broken down into nitrates. One of the challenges we have in removing ammonia, whether it's facultative lagoons or aerated lagoons, is our climate. It's very cold. Whereas within the Sagar, they actually have a insulating layer of mulch, rubber tires, chipped mulch, wood chips, and this allows to conserve the heat. And when the temperature is even at 1 degrees or 2 degrees C, the system has shown to be performing pretty good. So it is a very effective system. It's kind of made in Manitoba solution. And there are many, many communities in Manitoba and across Canada that has used this system. And most recently, we have installed this in Winkler, and it's a much larger system. This is some images showing how the gravel has been spread across the beds. And you can see the black is the liner. It's the lined, like I said, the excavated cell, Sagar cell is lined. And if you look closely, there are some of the aeration lines, and the gravel is being placed there, and that's the media, which eventually will allow the bugs to grow. And this is the insulating layer on the top, the insulating mulch. So I'm not going to bore you with any more technical information. I know it's a lot of technical jargon, and we get excited, but I know you're not. It's, like I said, the wastewater treatment is kind of dark art, right? So nobody knows what goes on, but it does do the job. So let's look at the scheduled path forward. So today we are July 15th. Today we are at the open house. We are working on submitting an Environmental Act proposal to the province that would identify the environmental impacts of the development, which is important. That would allow the city to be issued a license to construct the facility. You cannot construct until unless you have a license. And the licensing process is advertised, so if there are any public concerns or comments, anybody can submit those to the province. It will be on a public dashboard, and it will be also advertised generally in the Winnipeg Free Press, but also in the local newspapers. There is a long period of consultation, internal review that the province goes through. So that's why we put it for almost a year, September to August of next year. We would then undertake the detailed design and get that thing tender ready. Then project will be tendered, hopefully, in early 2028 or even earlier. And then if there is funding in place, and if the tender comes in within the budget, a contract would be awarded to a general contractor, and construction can begin in 2028 spring or early summer. And it takes about 2 years to go through all the construction and commissioning, startup, and final completion in 2030. Now, this is just a suggested schedule. A lot can happen that can change it. We can move this a little forward, or it can move back depending on many factors: funding, how long it takes to get the license, consultation, and those kind of stuff. So this is just a suggested schedule as we see it. I wouldn't call it optimistic, but it is a realistic schedule. We have allowed lots of time, but obviously a few things has to fall in place. And last but not the least, this is my last slide, and this shows the breakdown of cost. Right now, in terms of the design phase, we are at a preliminary design opinion of cost. We haven't started the detailed design yet, so this will go through several iterations. During detailed design, like we'll do a 33, 66, 95 pre-tender kind of an estimate. But your final number is what comes out through a construction tender, right? So right now we're sitting at just around $103 million. That's pretty much what I had to talk about today. I appreciate your attention, and we'll obviously go back to questions later on in the meeting. So thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And again, as everyone has been saying, thank you for taking the time to come out and to listen to such an exciting presentation. Sybil did actually a really good job. I think you should give him another hand, because how do you actually make engineering about wastewater interesting? And that's pretty impressive. I think the other two engineers here are saying, like, job well done. Like, this is like, the three amigos are trying to stick together, because no one really likes to talk about wastewater. And that's part of the reason why I'm here this afternoon. My name is Gordon Damon, as was shared before by Mayor Penner, and I am with the firm Red River Group. Now, the firm largely works around planning related to long-term real property projects. However, in my role in the firm, I also am involved beyond a lot of seniors housing projects. So if you're familiar at all with Boyne Care in Carman, that's a project that I had the sincere privilege of working with 5 municipalities on. And that's the type of stuff that my role is in working with municipalities. I help to facilitate stakeholder relations, looking at how to work with provincial and federal governments related to how we work towards grant funding, also working with financial institutions like Canada Infrastructure Bank, Access Credit Union as one option, or some of the chartered banks, and then also working specifically between, in this case, the province and local government in part beyond the professional training that I have, but just simply some of the experience because I'm a recovering politician. I used to be mayor of Niverville, and so have very much the experience of understanding what your council is experiencing now, but now as a recovering politician, very much experiencing what you folks are experiencing as ratepayers, because in the community that I live in, just outside of Niverville, I live in the arm of Rishot. I'm actually not a citizen anymore of Niverville. Ironically, I can throw a rock because my driveway goes off onto a town of Niverville road, even though I live in the arm of Rishot, my wife's grandparents' property on 10 acres. And so Niverville, along with Taché, Hanover, Rishot, de Salaberry, and Labroquerie, is taking one of the options that Cybele talked about, and that is a mechanical wastewater treatment facility. Situation was a little bit different there, and so we have that opportunity to move through that particular process. Having had the chance to investigate here and seeing what Morden has looked at, there is no question that moving forward with the process that you have is one that, with the Sagar system, is one that's extremely wise, and probably why Winkler did the same thing. Mechanical treatment needs discharge in winter, and so think of how many rivers are around that don't freeze in the winter, and I suspect you'd be figuring out pretty quickly you'd have to be piping it all the way to the Red River. That's a long way to go. The advantage to RSR's wastewater treatment facility, Niverville's lagoon, is only 3 kilometers from the Red River. So it's a very big difference in the way that you approach it. So it's wise in the movement forward. So the role that I've been engaged in by the City of Morden is to be able to assist essentially with all of these large stakeholder relationships and how to be able to put the pieces of the puzzle together to move things forward, because there's no question things need to move forward. So my presentation will largely speak about the options that we have related to how do we get from where we are today to the point that Cybele talked about in 2030 or in around that range to be able to achieve what is necessary. So today, Council's asked me to share, and staff have asked me to share essentially an update, and we say it's transparent. It is very transparent. Cybele spoke about that already, and it's part of a longer journey going back all the way to 2020 and probably even before that, because there is the need and the understanding that there would have to be something that would address not only the growth in the city, but all infrastructure eventually ages out. And so you need to also look at a renewal process. And so as Mayor Penner talked about, the engineering team has worked together, and Cybele did a great job. I don't think any stone was unturned to be able to come up with what would be the most practical and reasonable solution moving forward. And so, again, while things are still evolving and still working forward, there are some things that we can share today. What we know, where the experience, where the actual expansion concept and the preliminary costs are, which Cybele has spoken about a bit, the challenges that we're looking towards addressing. There's the licensing, there's obviously the funding of the project to make sure that it's affordable, and also the timing pressures. The timing pressures are sincere and real. And this has happened in other municipalities, and so this is why Council is so focused on this along with staff and the consultants, that if it gets to a point where in that release time, that period from June to November that Cybele talked about, when you can actually release the affluent into the process, that if all of a sudden you are producing more affluent than what can be contained in your current existing cells, that means that you need to stop development. And what that means in a realistic way, and this has happened in other communities, it's happened to Landmark on the eastern side of the river. It is currently happening in St. Malo, Manitoba, that the province steps in and tells the municipality, you are no longer able to issue any more building permits. And so basically development stops. And that has a significant impact, not only on developers who have made investments into the community, but it affects the community, because if you're wanting to see and invite neighbors to come in and consider Morden as a place to live, if you have family and friends that want to be here, any new construction is not possible. And that impacts at all different levels in regards to long-term sustainability, from economic and fiscal sustainability to obviously an infrastructure sustainability, but also even more so to a social sustainability of what the community is. And it impacts the region more broadly, and why the neighboring municipalities, from a regional economic development perspective, are also mindful that this is something that is important for Morden to achieve. The path forward, we're looking at the options in regards to dealing with that interim capacity, because that growth is happening, and there are concerns about capping that growth and not sure what to, and looking at ways to address that, to make sure and do whatever is possible, as Simon had laid out, to have the facility in place by 2030, and then also the regional planning and beyond. Just as we've seen in other areas, the idea of local government working together regionally is of benefit to everyone. It's a collaborative relationship. It's not competitive in nature. And so what happens is that if a new business opens up in Winkler, it's good for Stanley and it's good for Morden. If a new business opens up in Morden, or there's a new development as far as housing in Morden, it's good for Stanley and it is also good for Winkler as well. So there's a symbiotic relationship that we try and work this together. Each community has its own unique framing and its own desires about how it wants to grow, but there's a recognition that growing together collaboratively still benefits everyone, and that's why the province of Manitoba encourages this regional approach. So it's a needed project, as Cybele indicated, with a changed cost picture. I won't get into many of those details, because we've seen just in the last bit before this a really good overlay. At the beginning, there was a hope, obviously, to be able to maintain those costs around $70 million. The one thing that we do know is that every year that we delay an infrastructure project, that project goes up. So I can give from personal experience of what we saw in the RSR project, that when we went into the project, we were anticipating between $190 and $200 million, which was about 2.5 years ago. Then we went into the bidding process, and while we still have one portion of the project to be bid, the conveyance system, now we're probably somewhere between $260 and $270 million. And so because of the impact post-COVID, because specifically now in regards to some of the trade environment that we're experiencing, due to international decisions that are being made on the way that that trade is taking place, it does create some significant issues. And so we have all of these dynamics taking place, and so it just is wise to move forward when you can move forward, obviously reasonably and responsibly, but as prudently as possible, because it will not cost less tomorrow. That's one thing that I can probably guarantee everyone here, to say that it will always cost more tomorrow. So the three pressures that are shaping the timeline, there's the environmental licensing that we've already spoken about. It is a very robust process, obviously in the interest of protecting the community and ensuring that the infrastructure is going to perform reasonably enough that there's going to be long-term environmental sustainability for communities around. That's not only for the natural environment that we see, but also for urban environments, for ourselves in the residential area, to ensure that we're not in any way harming the watersheds that are required in regards to drinking water or potable water into the future. So Manitoba Environment reviews that. They look both at the short-term requirements, for instance, the actual strength, BOD counts, etc., of that waste going out. but then also the long-term impacts of things like nitrogen and phosphorus, in which, Cybele spoke about. And then from the larger perspective, what is that long-term environmental responsibility in regards to greenhouse gases? Because there's things from nitrous oxide to ammonia to methane. There's all types of things that need to be managed. And those are the type of licensing processes that will take place over the next year. And so part of today is part of that process to ensure that the public has an understanding of what is planned, so that when that environmental process goes through, that you have that opportunity to participate and feedback in that licensing process. Funding. Canada as a whole, Manitoba, like everyone else, is facing infrastructure deficits. And so all governments across the political spectrum, there's no one that can say, I did it right, or I did, or blame someone who did it wrong. Everyone has equal responsibility here. That with the nature of democracy that we have, and I say this as a recovering politician as well, because we largely work on four-year cycles, that yes, we always want to plan for the future responsibly and reasonably. I would say that every single politician elected from any political party at the federal or provincial level does think about future generations. Many of them have children and grandchildren, so they are thinking about this. But if there are massive pressures around, and you're thinking about making an investment that's long-term, and you're on a four-year cycle, and you're dealing with the immediacy of a current deficit, it's very hard to make those decisions to invest long-term. Because of that, over the last 20 or 30 years, that's resulted in a lot of infrastructure deficits that we face. You can drive a provincial highway today and you will find examples that they probably should have done some repairing sooner. You can see that at local government level where we have those pressures. A grader takes out a curb, and that's not necessarily replaced right now because we can wait and push that down the road a little bit because we've got other pressures to deal with. And that is why projects like this become so significantly challenged to move forward, because they involve large dollars, and they always inherently are involved in other levels of government because most local governments can't carry this on their own. So we look at trying to find ways to move forward. There is a traditional funding basis where it's 40% feds, 30% province, 33% province, and 27% local government. Those days that are nice and neat and tidy are largely gone because there are limited dollars. So we find all different ways to make things work. So there is the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which is one way. There is the continued effort of looking at partnerships, utilizing growth itself to help fund some of that cost into the future if there is debt that has to be taken on by the local government. Thankfully, what the Public Utilities Board does today, because of a decision approximately 10 to 12 years ago by the provincial government, is that future replacement of infrastructure where it's a utility, water or sewer, is actually being funded. So it doesn't help us today, but you can assure your grandkids and great-grandchildren in 40 years, there should be money in the bank to replace what they're doing today so that it all nicely moves along, because the idea is that the users of the system should pay. And so that's how we work with replacement today. So we've fixed that problem, but we still have the issue to deal with today. And so that funding is something that we continue to look at. The growth pressures. Southern Manitoba is a rapidly growing area. Folks want to be here. There's lots of economic opportunity. You folks are all friendly. Coming from the east side of the river, for those that have any Menno background, Yonsian and Ditseed, I'm from the wrong side of the river, obviously. And so we see and envy in many ways what we see happening here in Southern Manitoba, the growth that's taking place. Folks want to be here. You're entrepreneurial. You're community-minded. You work together in ways that allow you to do things and exceed the bar of what most communities do. And because of that growth, the infrastructure that's there hasn't been able to keep up. And so it does mean it has to be addressed more quickly. And so we're looking at trying to address that growth pressure, to accommodate it, to ensure that growth doesn't stop, so that there's still continued opportunity, so that there's reasonable and sustainable growth. But then at the same time, that growth that's going to be there, the more folks that you have in that pool means that on an individual basis, there's less cost to the individual users. So it's a balance of both. Now, to be very clear, the city is absolutely pursuing every senior government dollar that's available. They made application to what's called the CHIF program, which is transferred into a different program, but it was basically the Canadian Housing Initiative. They were successful of being able to receive $4.4 million to allow for temporary infrastructure to address the immediate aspect of growth, so that you would be able to have a bit of time to complete the main infrastructure. There has been collected to date more than $43 million in grants and funding that sits with the city. And so that's really encouraging. That's a long ways ahead of what many projects start with. But there's still a ways to go. If you saw 103 and you've got 43, there's still a gap of $60 million that needs to be addressed. Now, there's no question that part of that $60 million will be addressed through some borrowings by the city, which then means that borrowing needs to be serviced, and that service then obviously will become part of what you have as a utility fee and or related to taxes. But that amount has to be kept as reasonably and small as possible so that there's ongoing affordability, and the city is working profusely at making sure that happens. And so as we look at not only additional grants in regards to that infrastructure program, and the city has applications in and continues to be positive about the success of those, especially now after events like today and the progress that's being made, because senior levels of government do like to fund projects that are more shovel-ready. And so while not shovel-ready today, things are moving ahead rapidly. There's also the Canada Infrastructure Bank to be able to look at that. What CIB basically does is that it utilizes the borrowing capacity of the federal government for projects to be able to benefit from extremely low interest rates, because it's using Canada bond rates and the borrowing capacity of the Government of Canada while still having a responsibility to pay back like a bank, but at a lot lower cost. And so that actually leverages and helps to accelerate the ability of infrastructure projects to move forward. And wastewater is one of the approved infrastructure streams that they do work with. And so that's a possibility. And having lots of experience with RSR on the other side of the river, which we utilize Canada Infrastructure Bank, and they always need a partner. That partner was actually Access Credit Union. Lots of possibilities there to see if we can move with that. There's also the debt structuring, as we talked about. There will be a portion that the municipality, that the city will have to take responsibility for. You own a house, you have to pay some of your repairs, some of the upgrades. Everyone together will have to pay some of that, and so that's just the standard, and that will happen. And then working with the Manitoba Water Services Board, the partnership has been great. Manitoba Water Services Board is helping, and obviously some of you will know that the representative here today from Manitoba Water Services Board has a deep relationship with Morden, having worked here in the past. So there's a great partnership there, and so there's lots of really positive pathways forward. What will this lead to? Well, it's estimated that over the next 20 years, if the capacity is there, that Morden would be able to, add about 220 units per year, whether that's in actual houses or doors and apartments, if that's addressing seniors housing, affordable housing, but units is what is being created. So if you have 220 units over 20 years, that's 4,500 new households. Those 4,500 new households can actually help participate in helping to address the affordability matter for whatever cost there is for the city and moving forward with the actual wastewater facility. And so that every year that there's a delay in the construction does, in essence, mean that the pressure only increases because your cost to build something that will have to be rebuilt at some point, and also the lost opportunity of not having new friends and neighbors join you on this journey in Morden just means that every delay is truly an opportunity cost that should be avoided as much as possible. So what is council doing right now? Well, there's 3 tracks that they're working on to try and speed this up as much as possible. You know, an interim regional solution, as Mayor Penner spoke about, there is a framework MOU that has been executed with the arm of Stanley to be able to utilize a portion of Stanley's existing treatment allocation that they have in the wastewater treatment system. That's a partnership between Winkler and Stanley. And so Stanley has some capacity there, and that may provide an opportunity to allow for an interim measure so that there's time to allow for building the facility without closing down any development here. The second part is that the permanent facility, that's job number 1. That's what you heard before. That has to happen no matter what agreements are in place, no matter where the funding is. So that process continues. That is something that has to be in place. You know, the licensing, the final design, the final budget estimations, those things need to move forward so that we're ready to move and get that going. And so that is something that the city is focused on. And then the regional planning, one of the, I think, really neat things about the framework that Stanley and Morden have signed together is that they will actually be going to the Manitoba Water Services Board and requesting for them as a third party, a neutral party, to facilitate a regional wastewater study. Those efforts have been made in the past. Certainly, Winkler has requested that there would be a regional approach, Stanley as well, and obviously Morden's committed to that. And so utilizing the Manitoba Water Services Board to select and help frame and scope what that study would look like. What are the things that can be done into the future to ensure that, you know, at minimum, as Cybele talked about, that operators can work together, that you can actually, if you have similar systems, there may be, you know, some labor sharing options between, you know, Winkler, Stanley, and Morden because you have similar systems. It's hard to get wastewater operators these days. Having that part is just one small example. There's much larger examples about what can happen into the future. We don't know what that looks like. That's not predetermined. That's the purpose of the study. But the ideas around sustainability, both environmentally and socially and fiscally, but then also opportunity in regards to growth and what we can already do to build on the powerhouse foundation that's already here for the communities so that you can be and continue to be an economic driver for the province of Manitoba. And that's why the province is interested, because they recognize the important role that this region has in the overall economic development for the province of Manitoba. Just talk a moment about the framework, what it is and what it's not, just for clarity. So it's a non-binding policy framework that's been approved by both councils. They work through those details. And so it's a memorandum of understanding. As everyone knows, it's an understanding. It's not a legally binding document, but the document does indicate that Stanley and Morden will work towards a definitive agreement to be able to address some of the needs for an interim requirement for some of the treatment. It contemplates the temporary use by Morden of the portion of Stanley's existing wastewater treatment allocation. As some of you may know, that when Stanley and Winkler entered into their agreement, Stanley had to ensure that what was being built would accommodate all of the potential use of what was required from both their residential and also the business corridor between Winkler and Morden. And so they recognized that on the residential side and some of the urban settings, that it would take time for those residents to adopt and come into the system. And so there's a space of time right now. There's kind of, it's like, you know, like that Goldilocks theory, that it's just the right time right now that they can actually grasp and utilize some of that allocation before everyone comes into the system. And so that's the idea. That's simply what it is. It's not stealing from anyone. It's not forcing anyone to use anything. It's simply utilizing that benefits both Stanley and Morden at the same time. Well, at the same time, recognizing that this is a Stanley and Winkler negotiation to work out in regards to whether this is even possible. It would make use of that treatment allocation to be able to assist all of the parties in the region. To clarify what it is not, it does not authorize the start of any wastewater services. Even though it's signed, it doesn't mean, oh, now everything's good. There's some things that need to still happen. It does not create legal rights to treatment capacity. There's no long-term legal rights that bind Stanley into this long-term. It is clearly temporary, and it does not amend the existing Winkler-Stanley Regional Wastewater Treatment Agreement. They already have mechanisms. It's a well-written agreement that they have to be able to address opportunities like this. And so that's something that Stanley will be working with Winkler, and if they are able to negotiate that out, then Stanley, as a signatory of the framework MOU, will come back to Morden and say, yes, we have an opportunity to work together. If that works out, that provides the time, as we talked about, on the interim for that particular solution. That's why the framework MOU was put together. However, if it doesn't work out, Morden fully respects the negotiations that have to take place between Stanley and Winkler and what they have to work out in their best interest, because it's their facility. And so on that basis, no matter what the outcome of the MOU is, Morden does not stop design. Morden does not stop moving forward. Morden has to move forward. The difference, though, is that it raises the risk that there may have to be some development stoppage in Morden during that time. That's not healthy for Morden, doesn't help Morden, and it's actually not healthy for the region, because if Morden is not open to be able to accommodate overall housing for the region as a whole, it actually places more pressure on Winkler and Stanley, and it actually makes it somewhat difficult for them to grow sustainably as well. So that's why this is a regional solution. That's why it is in everyone's best interest to work together while respecting existing agreements fully and moving forward in a way that's collaborative and in an effort that the province of Manitoba supports, and hopefully they'll provide some funding to the Manitoba Water Services Board to even drive this opportunity into the future as well. So that regional wastewater study, I just want to very, very quickly touch base on that on the basis that it proceeds in parallel with what is happening. Nothing pauses in regards to the design. If it takes 6 months to put that study parameters together and receive the funding, if that happens in February, March of next year, again, Morden is designing. Morden is preparing for the new lagoon. That is job number one. Job number one. If you take one thing away from today, designing and getting the engineers to get to the point of getting the lagoon designed and ready for tender is job number one. That has to happen. Job number two is looking for the opportunity to utilize some of the existing capacity that Stanley has. And then job number three is that idea of moving forward of what we can all do together as a region, utilizing and asking the province to assist us with that. So those are the steps. That is what's happening. That is critical because without that, we can't achieve this potential timeline, which is similar to what Saibal had talked about. And so I won't spend much time on this so that we have more time for questions. But this is very similar to what you saw before. I'm saying 2031 rather than 2030, but it's tomato. It's around 2030 is what we're looking at. So affordability is something that we need to focus on. We need to maximize those grants, smarter borrowing, growth pays for its share, as we talked about, and there's the cost recovery on the interim deal if that is reached. So basically, it's cost recovery for any affluent that's being treated. If you're here and wondering from the Stanley perspective, Stanley is not providing, a freebie here. It will be; those costs will be covered. We need to look at that smarter borrowing, as we talked about. The grants continue; those efforts being made. And once again, if that interim arrangement is there, then that growth continues to happen to be able to make it more affordable for everyone in the community. So there's a clear direction. There is a permanent solution that's being designed and financed responsibly. You've heard about that design. You've seen it. You see why it's important to move forward. There's the interim regional bridge with Stanley, and there is a signed framework to make every effort to ensure that growth doesn't stop in the interim while that design is being worked out and while funding is being clarified. Every senior government funding avenue is being actively pursued. I can assure you of that, seeing how city staff have been working and continue to make every effort on that basis. And the goal is capacity in place within 5 years, delivered affordably. So now we have that opportunity to open up for questions. If you have questions that you're not sure and not comfortable asking, by all means, utilize the cards. If you have questions that you would like to openly ask here, as we can see, come to one of the mics. And then what I will do is I will facilitate and have the person that is best represented in answering your question to come up to the podium. If we're not able to answer that question today, city staff are also taking those questions down, and they will follow up within a short period of time after this meeting. When you come to the mic, if you can provide your name and where you're from, and then your question. Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Miriam. I live in Morden. I work for Many Hands Resource Center. Thank you for the presentation. I might have missed this. I have lived in Morden for 8 years, so I'm not very familiar with the history of the project, so I have 2 questions. First, looking back, when did the city first recognize that the existing wastewater system would eventually need to be replaced? And second, you mentioned that part of the remaining cost will ultimately be covered through utility fees and possibly taxes. Based on today's estimate, what could this mean for the average household in Morden? Even a rough estimate would be helpful. Thank you.
Great, 2 great questions. So we'll start with the first one, related to when the city began to be aware of the needed upgrades on infrastructure. So which one of our 3 engineering amigos would like to take that one on? There's a mic here, so we can actually make it easy. We can do it that way.
So,
I think it's on.
so the project history goes back to 2012. I think that was the first time when Winkler and Morden and Stanley started looking at wastewater treatment option. Initially, it was investigated as a regional system, and it proceeded to preliminary design, I think by the time it was 2015. And at that time, the consultants and the cities, they learned that we still need storage. So if we go with a regional facility at one location, say it's Winkler, then Morden's lagoon will be a wastage, and we will have to put in a new lagoon, additional capacity at Winkler location. So at that time, a decision was made that, okay, let's pursue separate facilities at the existing locations. So Morden hired a local company, and they proceeded with the design of the Morden facility at the Huron, and Winkler proceeded with theirs. Morden's design was completed in 2017 or 18, and Morden and Winkler, they both applied for funding as a regional project to the Clean Water and Wastewater Fund, which provided 40% federal funding, 33% provincial, and rest was the municipal share. Morden's Environment Act proposal was submitted in 2017, which never was approved. And in 2020, Morden proceeded with a third-party review of the design, which came back that the original proposed estimated cost of the design was very low. And the revised cost came at 60 million, whereas the original cost was proposed at 27. So then Morden went back to the drawing board again, and we started, as Saibal explained, we were since then investigating different options. So I think that answers the first question, that it started in 2012, but went through a number of options. We were close in 2017, Environment Act proposal was submitted, but then when the review was completed, the design was found to be insufficient, and we went back to the drawing table. Estimated cost was insufficient, and project could not proceed on that design and within that funding. If that answers that part, then
Yeah.
I will.
That's great.
Give it to-
I'll take over
Yeah.
for the second question. So if there's more information that you need about that afterwards, these folks are available that you can come after, but that gives a good overall assessment of that. In regards to the cost, and I say this from our experience on the RSR side, at this particular juncture and stage, it's a really difficult question to assess and answer. And the reason for that is that the hope is that it would not exceed what the cost to the city would not be more than 27% and hopefully less in the overall capital cost. But even if you know that particular number today, let's say we knew that Saibal said it's for sure $100 million and the city's responsibility is $27 million, and then it would be to say that's what your amount is. At that point, city staff wouldn't even be able to provide you specifically how that impact would be, because you don't know if you would do it over a general mill rate and some of it going on utility rates in regards to wastewater, because that wouldn't be broken down yet. And further, over the build period, you would also have individuals that would be building homes, which would then obviously decrease because you've got more people to share. So what we found and what we did, and this is being transparent, and one of the recommendations that I had to City Council was that when that reasonable and understandable question has going to be asked, because it will be, and I'm so glad you asked it right away, is that essentially about a year to a year and a half before we started construction in RSR, we had a series of public meetings that laid out what that impact would be financially. And the reason for that is that there were two requirements: that if you make any increases to the current existing utility rates that any of you pay today in Morden, it requires a Public Utilities Board application. In that application, it will require a public meeting, and if folks are not satisfied with what council presents at that point in that public meeting, then you can raise objection, and there will be a public hearing by the Public Utilities Board, and the Public Utilities Board then can actually order a different rate than what was requested by the city. That is actually what happens. Manitoba Hydro often requests a higher rate, PUB makes it lower. MPI requests a higher rate, PUB has made it lower. Occasionally, PUB has also said it has to be higher. So there's an outside agency that reviews that in the protection for each of us as ratepayers, whether I'm in Niverville or whether we're in Morden or Winkler, wherever it is. That's something that every public utility that is a monopoly has to answer to. The second thing that would happen is that if the city would decide to, say, borrow $10 million and debenturize it and have it on taxes, then they would actually have to go through a public hearing process as well under the Municipal Act. And so there would be opportunity for everyone to speak to it at that point. That all happens before the project starts because those things have to be in place largely to satisfy the project proponents. So you will have that opportunity to be able to speak back to it. Having said all of that, city staff, finance staff have said they would be open to meeting to individuals that feel that their impact would be significant, to be able to sit down individually one-on-one and look at what some of those possibilities would be. But the reason not doing it publicly is because there is no public answer. But they would be more than willing to sit down with you afterwards to assist with that. So I think that's probably the best way to do it. It's going to be affordable. It needs to be affordable. One of the reasons the project probably hasn't moved forward now is because council is concerned about that affordability. That's important for ratepayers. That's important for businesses. Frankly, it's important for them because they also own homes in the community and they also don't want to pay more than any of you do. So all in the same boat of keeping that accountability on that side. So those numbers will come as far as what those costs will be. There will be some increase, but every effort will be made to ensure that it's affordable and sustainable. Mayor Penner, with that, did you want to add anything? No. You have the mic there as well.
Sorry, no. Like Mr. Damon said, council is very concerned on keeping rates affordable and keeping them within line. And as we go forward with public utility applications, then those rates will, what we submit, once we know our costs and how much funding we get between now and then, and what the city's share will be at the very end, will determine so much later on down the road. And until we know those firm numbers, we can't go forward. But our finance officer is here, and if you want to meet with him one-on-one, he can share some numbers. But we just don't know at this point. But council's goal is to keep rates as affordable as we can.
And there's also a comparative overall, just as a quick summation. The Public Utilities Board, but also City Council and staff will want to ensure at all times that your rates are competitive with other communities, because obviously if you're way higher than the other communities, that's going to discourage growth as well. And so there is a natural process of what's looked at in that regards. And the province is actually sensitive to that as well, in wanting to ensure that they're assisting communities to have as much a level playing field as possible. So thanks for those questions. Go ahead. Your name and the question, please.
Hi, my name is Val Lowen. I live in Morden and basically born and raised.
Great.
Glad to be here and thank you for doing this. I commend the council and all their efforts to try to find a solution that will provide Morden a strong future. You mentioned, I'm sorry I forget your name, the man
Gordon.
that's
Yeah, it's Gordon, yeah.
standing. You mentioned that the Public Utilities Board has future funding implemented now, where it wasn't before. I've had conversation with people in the Morden that to pay a minimum water bill of $69 for 3 months is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. It's way too cheap. I understand the Municipality Act and the financial structure of a municipality is very different. You have certain things you can do to take on debt and not take on debt. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about, we just asked, what about the future? What's going to happen to our costs? how is this new Public Utilities Board to provide future funding going to change, and when will it be implemented, that the city like Morden could start charging for the future? How quickly does that happen?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I don't know when the last rate application was made, but in the current requirement, whatever the last application, 2013. So 2013, so that's 13 years ago. Municipalities are encouraged to submit every 5 years, so obviously the city's proficiently working on a new application. So this is very timely, that there would be two options that would be able to happen. That one, they would look at that, what's called the reserve and replacement component of essentially depreciation. No doubt, if the facility is some 30, 35 years old and starting in 2013, I don't know if that requirement was in place for that study. There may not have been some funding towards that, but if they did, it won't have been enough to replace it. But no doubt, utilities build up a surplus for that reserve. If it hasn't been done, going forward, yes, that application will be going forward to the PUB now, possibly, and a lot of municipalities during COVID, there was the encouragement just to simply pause and wait. Maybe Mayor Penner will have a comment in regards to where the current application is for the utility. But when that's made, they would, yes, address that, but they can only address it based on the current facility. They can't do that without a special order for the future. I can share with you that the PUB actually made, in RSR's case, an interim order for RSR that during construction we're actually to help avoid what's called rate shock, if there's any rate shock, because you're correct. Too many of us have appreciated, not too many. It's great that we've appreciated low rates, but it maybe hasn't always been a responsible way to ensure long-term sustainability. Most of us would probably not run our own savings account or retirement like that. It's assuming that the money will be there when we retire and not having any savings. And so what we did in trying to avoid rate shock, because the rates were going up with RSR as well, much better system, much more opportunity, but it costs some more, was that during the build period we had an interim order that already had a small increase, so that when it's operational, that any future increase wouldn't feel as dramatic. That might be something that they can consider, and certainly they're hearing today that option, and we'll be able to have that discussion. But we won't be able to do that until we have a little bit firmer numbers. And so that's probably over the next year, the design and stuff. But the good news for all of you is that if that is what City Council decides to do a year from now, there is advertising that goes out. Check your City of Morden website regularly. Check, your local newspaper. Check local notifications, and it will say that, here's the application. If you have any concerns, write into the Public Utilities Board. And if there's enough concerns raised, there literally will be a public hearing like this, and you'll have a panel of individuals coming from across Manitoba to hear your concerns. I'm just like, I've done a lot of these meetings, and during the RSR period when we did 6 or 7 of them, people were very gracious and kind because they recognized, as you did, there needed to be an investment and that some of these things should have been done sooner, but they weren't. Now we're in this stage, but I don't know if I've ever heard publicly someone said that my rates aren't high enough. So thank you for being that brave.
Say that.
Yeah, thank you
do.
for being that brave, because in reality, that's true. I will say that the same thing with Manitoba Hydro rates. I'm not saying that I don't enjoy paying 9 cents a kilowatt hour, and it's a good investment back as a dividend to being a taxpayer in Manitoba, because we own Manitoba Hydro, but ultimately those rates are too low and they're not sustainable. And so there's different things that we need to look at. But I'm not sitting on Broadway, whether I'm a Conservative or an NDP party member or Liberal, if that ever wins, if their party ever wins in the future. Heaven help them if they ever want to see those rates raised, because it's a Manitoba thing to be able to say that we have low Manitoba hydro rates. It's embedded in our culture.
If I could, two more
Please.
questions quickly. Did I understand correctly that our proposed new system will be partially mechanical? Did I understand that?
Seibel, why don't you answer that?
Yes, because we are going to add extra air, so
Yeah.
there is some mechanical components, but it's primarily a lagoon-based system. Yeah, it's not a true mechanical treatment plant.
And number two?
And number two, what failed to not bring on Winkler and Morden together in a more immediate regional system?
You're talking about earlier?
Yeah.
That's a question that Mayor Penner would have to answer, but I would suggest there are numerous reasons, and at this particular point, quite frankly, they probably don't matter anymore because Winkler and Stanley have built their plants. So the mayor of Winkler is here, which is, Mayor Siemens is here, which I think is a great commitment to showing the regionalism. Mayor Penner is here. I know that representatives from Stanley is here. Yep, there we see the Deputy Reeve is here. Thank you for being here. And so on that basis, that already shows a regional approach. The one thing I can say, being a quote-unquote outsider from the other side of the river, there's a sincere desire of all the parties to work together. But it's a matter of how you frame it and how you basically pull it together that's equitable and fair to everyone. And that's the reason why asking the Manitoba Water Services Board to be able to assist in that future study.
And it's interesting, we have an MOU with Stanley, which will be discussed between Stanley and Winkler and then come back to Morden and Stanley. And that also demonstrates regional
It does.
collaboration.
It does. Yeah.
Thank
Great.
you.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions? And we're good for time. We have about 25 minutes left. So you have a long question, sir.
Just don't take a long time to answer, that's all.
No, we'll try.
Question I have, with the borrowing...
Sorry, your name, sir, and where
Hank
you're from?
Hildebrand, City of Morden.
Yep.
I thought everybody knew me here. so
Well,
that's why
I
don't-
apologize.
don't
I
know.
haven't had the pleasure of meeting
Okay.
you before.
No, okay. So just wondering, does the maximum borrowing capacity play a part in the financing of the wastewater treatment?
Yes.
And how much is it, Edward? 42 million? Okay.
42 million is the answer. In Manitoba, for being brevity, to respect the question, the province of Manitoba provides a guideline. It's not a legislated or requirement that's regulated, but there is a guideline that municipalities have a limit as to how much debt they have to have, because essentially the Municipal Act will indicate and share that if a municipality fails, typically the province takes it over, and so this is how they manage the debt to make sure that one municipality isn't taking on more than they should.
And that
Great
we
question.
don't want to happen. So the point of that is that we can't spend the whole 42 million on just wastewater because there's roads and streets and sidewalks that need to
Absolutely.
be funded in the future, or
Yep.
along with our potable water. When you're mentioning the arm of Stanley, that the board could share or the Stanley could share a portion of their wastewater portion with the City of Morden, practically how does that work? Because they're part of the Winkler wastewater treatment plant, correct?
Yeah. So I believe that the Winkler and Stanley agreement, while subject to an NDA, essentially says that Stanley has X amount of capacity in the lagoon. Winkler has X amount. Stanley right now, and they had to build out for a 20-year timeline. Stanley is not utilizing all of their capacity. And so the opportunity there is for Morden to essentially, through a force main, send it to the facility, which is Winkler's and Stanley's together.
No. Okay.
And so that would happen. But in any agreement that would move forward, and this is why Stanley's having the discussion with Winkler, that discussion has to happen between Winkler and Stanley first. Then Stanley will let Morden know what happens, and we'll see if that works out.
Okay, but practically that might not make sense because it's like a $10 million project to pipe from Morden to Winkler's lagoon. So it would be very costly, wouldn't it, to absorb that?
So my
portion of Stanley's?
understanding, and Seibel can maybe speak to this, but They've already priced that connection out at force main and the required mechanical side, lift station, et cetera, to be able to put that in. That is funding that the province has already announced isn't in place because the province wanted to assist to find a temporary solution. The budgeted amount for that amount in which the province had provided that funding for, and that I don't know if it's been specifically tendered, but my understanding is that the budgeted amount is certainly available, so that money's in place. It's a factor that's there. And after it's not utilized anymore, if this moves forward, where that water, that affluent is moving from Morden to Winkler right now, there may be a possibility, because the pipe probably stays in the ground, to look on a regional basis. Do you look at some broader regional basis where, you know, there's some connection where you help each other out? One doesn't know. That's the purpose of the study. So as far as the funding for that pipe, it's there. As far as the ability to do it, it's been engineered. As far as the, essentially not the tendering, but the costing, it's there. So that is something that could happen quite quickly, assuming that Morden is able to go there. But if they can't, because there's not agreement through the MOU, that doesn't stop moving forward the planning and everything with a lagoon.
Okay, that's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you.
Gordon, can I just
please.
get back to the public utility question about our application with PUB? Morden did put an application back in 2024 to the Public Utility Board, and it showed all our sort of go-forward capital costs for the new system that we're planning, but it was rejected by the Public Utility Board because we actually weren't in production at that time with our capital project. So they rejected that public or increase in rates at that time. So they sent it back. We now, because the rates were based on future infrastructure needs, and they said, well, you can't sort of bank those increased costs now. You have to wait till you're actually incurring those costs. So they sent it back to us, and so now we've resubmitted an application to the public utility boards. They said just do a general one, and they sent that back, and now we're back in the ballpark again and resubmitting under their criteria. So it's a bit of back and forth with the public utility boards, and it is frustrating because it's kind of like if you want to go buy a house, you know you're going to have a big down payment you have to make. You then say to yourself, well, I better save up for this down payment because I got this big capital, mortgage I'm going to have to borrow on. But the Public Utility Board doesn't work that way. They don't let you save up for that big infrastructure project you've got down the road. So it's frustrating. So until you actually have that expense on your plate, they won't let you ask for a rate increase. So that's why the city hasn't asked for a rate increase, because we haven't had an expense to ask for the rate increase on. So that's why our rates haven't increased over the last number of years. I don't know if that explains it, but it's just the way the Public Utility Board works.
So what Mayor Penner is making very clear is that the Public Utilities Board very much has you as ratepayers in their mind and their interest. The concept of what Mayor Penner was talking about paying or saving up in the future is that there is very much a principle, and that is that user pay. So they won't allow for funding on future projects because those future projects may not come, and that means you today pay on something that may never actually happen, and you're not benefiting from it. It's not user pay system. What they do allow, and not only do they allow, they require, is payment of depreciation on the existing site. So as that site is being depreciated, you're collecting enough to replace exactly what you have. The challenge comes about is that what do you do when what you have you won't replace because it's not sufficient to meet current needs in regards to the environment. That's one of the downsides, and so that's what Mayor Penner is talking about. it's a process back and forth, but I think this does exhibit and express that the Public Utilities Board always has ratepayers first and foremost in mind, because we accept the fact that there's a monopoly. We can't get our wastewater from anyone else except our municipalities. So they really strictly review what municipalities do on this. Another question?
I would like to add
Oh, yeah,
a little
please.
bit to the question regarding the cost of the temporary option. So the option that was explored in 2025 and preliminary design was completed, the cost was 2.5 million for that option. But if any parameters change, if Stanley can accept more sewage than what was contemplated in that design, then the cost might change. But that cost was 2.5 million originally.
Thank you so much. Next question.
Well, my name is Nicole. I just want to ask who's doing that lovely lady's laundry for $69 every 3 months, because no one's doing mine for that amount of money. But I just want to thank you for putting on this forum. I think it's great that we brought communities together to put facts together, and I hope that this makes us as a community and a business stronger and can kind of break some of the divisive nature that this topic has brought. So thank you for doing this. My question is, what can we as community members and business members do to advocate to government or find other funding options so that maybe it doesn't more land in our pocket? Is being a squeaky wheel helpful? Is there something that we can do as community to try and advocate together? And if so, can someone help us to do that?
So that's a political question. I would ask Mayor Penner to take that one on.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, for the question. And I know the Chamber has supported us in writing to our MPs and our MLAs and to other members of Parliament and provincial MLAs to express the need for this wastewater project, because to attract investors to the community, to ensure that homes are built, to ensure that growth happens here. Wastewater is a critical infrastructure need that we need within our communities. So if, a letter, we have Brandon Leslie, I think he's still here with, on the Conservative side. The Liberal side is in power right now, but if we can just create awareness and contact our, I know Carrie Hebert's been a big proponent in the Manitoba legislature whenever she can bring it up. We unfortunately don't have sitting parliament or MLAs in the House, but as whatever we can do to have our both federal and provincial governments. I know, like I mentioned, this wastewater project is a pricey one. We're not asking both federal or provincial to carry this financial load alone, but neither can the City of Morden carry this alone either. And it's critical to the future, not only to Morden, but to the region. And this region is an economic driver, and I think both federally and provincially, we are known as economic drivers out in this region, and if we can get our wastewater solution resolved, we will just, it'll be unbelievable on how the economic growth will happen when we look at the number of houses that can be built over the next 20 years with the wastewater resolved. It'll just help with employment, help with industry growth, and just secure. We're looking at a new high school, so we know the families are growing, the children are here, and as they graduate and want to remain in the region, we need this wastewater desperately to bring both the investors and the developers back to our community. So one way is to send letters to our MPs and MLAs and other members of both provincial and federal departments.
Thank you. As there's no one else oh, sir, are you coming to the mic? Go ahead, sir.
Gary Haggerty, Morden. I just wanted to follow on a question that Hank answered, asked to me. If we're going to build a pipeline, a small pipeline between here and Winkler for temporary, has any thought been given to building a larger pipeline and a larger lagoon in Winkler and doing it in one facility? Wouldn't it be a little bit more efficient?
Seibel.
Well, that was one of the options. We did not give you any details, but we had looked at transferring all of the wastewater from Morden to an integrated facility in Winkler and expand that concept that they have at that time, which was under construction. And that project didn't proceed, but we have looked into that.
Thank you. Next question.
Claire Agnew from Morden,
Yes.
Morden Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for the presentation today. My question is, based on the schedule that you provided, at what point in that schedule are development and building permits made available, or is that something that's not available until it's completed?
Can you frame the permits as far as like permits stopping or permits being issued? I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Being issued, made
Being-
available to our developers and people that are wanting to develop and build houses here.
Okay, so you're saying when will they be able to receive them to essentially build, is what
Start.
you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Rick.
Thank you. That's a great question. The issuing of permits is really falls under a larger planning requirement, and there's a restriction right now because there just isn't a wastewater capacity. So as soon as we're moving forward in this project, we will be looking at the soonest possible timeframes we can start issuing permits. And that means we have to have the project, either the shovels in the ground, moving forward, and then working with the developers. There's a risk here to developers building in advance. They could build it, but we then can't provide the services. So there's a risk of developing too much that can't be supported. So we're actively looking at the fastest possible timelines to get these in the ground, looking at timelines when the capacity will be available, and then issuing permits that will sync up with that.
Yes, sir. Your name and where you're from.
Yes, Barry Bell, and I live in Morden. I just have a question regarding, you've talked a lot about residential, but no mention of industrial. How will that play into the scenario? Like, are industries not coming here right now because of the delays?
Mayor Penner, that's a political question. I think you can take that on.
Well, we're preparing for wastewater. We're expanding. We've expanded our industrial park because we were full. We've purchased 147 acres just in the southeast corner of the city. We've developed phase one. I think we're ready to, subdivision is ready to go, and lots are ready for subdivision. So some of the lots are ready for purchase. Wastewater capacity, some of the sale of those lots may or may not impact, and maybe I'll ask Nick to address some of that. But we're preparing for commercial development. Now, when we look at the grocery store, that just got announced, and there was wastewater capacity available for that development, I think. But then that domino effect is creating more commercial or retail space being developed. But I think those developments may come after wastewater. So maybe I'll let Nick too address some of the industrial and when those lots will be available for permitting.
Thank you. I've been here for 3 weeks in this particular job position, and I can honestly tell you there's a lot of interest in terms of commercial and industrial growth in our city. We were seeing a lot of applications come through, and we're working with all the different industries to give them realistic time frames and to facilitate and support these developments. So the short answer to this, yes, there's a lot of interest for industry to move here as well as commercial development. We just need to get this wastewater treatment system up and working as quickly as possible. And there are some developments that are proceeding because they were grandfathered. For example, I don't think it's any secret we're getting a no frills here. And that's really important to our economy in terms of the local residents and having choices. We want to facilitate that. So there is some growth that can happen because it's been grandfathered in, a limited amount. We're looking to remove that bottleneck as quickly as possible. So the short answer is yes, there's a lot of interest and our community is going to grow.
And will the temporary, if we go ahead with a temporary system, will that allow for any development in the short term?
It may, and we'll have to look at that from the whole MOU standpoint and what the implications there are. But I would think that would possibly facilitate some development, and we'd have to be very judicious how we proceed on that.
Until between now and commissioning of
Commissioning.
our system. Yeah.
It should be up and operating in about 2 years. So once we have that interim connection in place, that will be the first step towards opening up potential development in Winkler, or no, not Winkler, sorry, in Morden here. And instead of Winkler getting all the good stuff, we'll start seeing all the development here.
All right, so it's 5-2 and respecting everyone's time. And moving forward, thank you to everyone who has participated for your questions. Democracy works best when community gets involved. Community grows most when we see one another and meet around tables like this. So thank you for taking the time, caring about your community, being out here. Also for the those that are from outside of Morden, like the politicians that are here, that are representing different places. Thank you for making the time to hear Morden's story. If you have further questions, city staff are here. You can also place questions in the Q&A box. Those will be followed up with. If this was just so riveting and exciting, you can come back here tonight at 7 o'clock for round 2. If you thought that you should have asked a question to have a chance. And with that, unless Mayor Penner has any closing words, I think she says no. So that means thank you, good afternoon, and appreciate you coming out this afternoon.
I just should say a couple of closing remarks. I just want to thank you again for your interest, for your concern for Morden, and for the future of our city. So thank you again for taking the time this afternoon.